It's just a science project.
Silent breed is people!
You know, a doctor friend once said the same thing to me. Frankenstein was his name.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
That sounds like something out of science fiction.
Please explain to me the scientific nature of the whammy.
We live in a spaceship, dear.
So? Yes, science!
Program complete. Enter when ready.
Hello and welcome to Science on Top, episode 221. Today is Sunday, the 10th of April 2016. I'm Ed Brown and I'm joined by Dr. Shane Joseph.
Hello.
And Penny Dumsday.
Hello.
And on the show tonight we'll be talking about 3D printed eggs that could be the key to vulture conservation, and birds that have learnt to recognise humans that they hate. But first, Australian researchers believe they are close to being able to use stem cells to regrow human bone and tissue. Shane, this is essentially the holy grail of stem cell technology, to grow a new liver or heart or bones or whatever from the patient's own cells so that there's no rejection. This is looking at repairing cells in situ, though, in the body, yeah?
Yeah, pretty much. So first of all, the whole idea of regrowing a limb at the moment is very pie in the sky. I mean, it's obviously where we'd like to be, but it's a long, long way off. I mean, what these researchers have done is pretty amazing in itself. I mean, from what I understand from the diagram that we've seen, this sort of, first of all, I like to say, this sort of harkens back a little bit to the story, the Japanese story.
Yes, the stat ones.
Yeah, and that kind of worries me. So hopefully this is repeated and it's confirmed, because it's very cool. Basically, you extract fat cells from the person, and then you treat them for 2 weeks with a variety of growth factors. And that somehow seems to, in some way, kind of reprogram them into stem cells. And then you essentially inject them into the site where you want them to work. And through some mechanism that the researchers don't understand yet, they seem to work. And they seem to fix damaged muscle and bone. And so, yeah, eventually the idea is that we'll be able to regrow entire body parts and organs and stuff like that, because I suppose the next thing they need to find out is, how is this actually working? What is going on here? I mean, they've likened it to the way that salamanders can regrow their limbs, which is what I think started this whole, oh my god, we can now grow limbs. So it's a long way off that, but they seem to think it's similar to that mechanism. And I would actually like to read the paper that's been published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. I haven't got access to that paper yet, so
But so it's kind of I'm wondering what the really breakthrough part of this is. Is it that they've managed to essentially induce stem cells, taken specialised fat cells, treating them with these growth factors and making them pluripotent stem cells again? Or is it that they've found a way of injecting those stem cells into the one spot and making them grow into whatever tissue they're into?
From what I understand, I think it's a bit of both. I mean, so first of all, again, as you said, the holy grail is to be able to bypass the whole embryonic stem cell thing, which is its own plethora of issues, and that way, not only is it ethically, less sort of weird, but you are by taking the person's own cells, there's no possibility of, rejection or less possibility anyway. And obviously, the closer you are to that person's DNA, the better, the better it is for treatment. And if they can actually do this, now the 2-week time period for this one experiment seems to be pretty good. And I think they did this again from mice. Okay, so they've done this in a mouse model, and that seems to work. They've also done it. They said human bone and fat cells. I'm not really sure. Anyway,
well, even if it's not injected into a living organism, it's still an impressive thing to do if they inject it into similar tissue and it develops.
I mean, I suppose it's I'd like to know the sort of volume of cells they get out of this, and is it feasible? Is it then feasible to then inject this into a subject and get this to work? And I'm not an expert on this at all, so I don't know how much they need to inject to then create this response and to start this off. I mean, is it just a little bit? Is it a series of injections? Is it sort of an ongoing thing? I'm not really sure. I mean, I would imagine for the Holy Grail for something like regrowing an entire limb, that would be a very, very complicated process. That wouldn't just be I'll inject this into the stump and then you'll grow a leg. No,
especially because a limb is more than just one type of tissue anyway. It's
Exactly,
blood,
yeah.
it's muscle, it's bone, it's all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But in terms of maybe regrowing a liver, which is essentially all liver cells and blood vessels as well, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder if they can do that in situ, in the actual body itself, or if they'd have to do it sort of, basically in the lab, and then, like in a specialized vessel. I don't know. It's so much. The problem with all this, a lot of this research is that immediately your brain starts to go into a place where we can do this. This is amazing, and it's true. Like one day it will be the case, but at the moment it's still very, very early days.
Yeah, sure.
The fact that they've even managed to get pluripotent stem cells out of fat cells is amazing in itself. Now, the question is...
usually it's bone marrow or skin tissue, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, basically. I've never heard of it from fat cells. So, hey, this is that. On its own, that's a great discovery. And if they can then make this into something that, we can use as a therapy, then hey...
It's worrying that I had the exact same thought as you when we first read this. I thought, this sounds eerily familiar. A groundbreaking new stem cell technology that's been tested in mice that is promising something amazing. Oh, it all sounds familiar, like the disgraced Riken Institute discovery.
Yeah.
But let's keep an eye on it and see if it gets reproduced, as you say, if other people around the world are able to reproduce this experiment and get these results. It'll be very, very cool. Okay, Penny. Now, vultures might not be the most glamorous of birds, but they play an important part in the ecosystem. But they're under threat, particularly in Africa, and conservationists are turning to 3D printing to try and protect vultures. This is cool.
This is really cool. Something I've always found interesting when watching wildlife documentaries is they'll stick a transmitter the size of a brick on like a sparrow and say, and the bird doesn't even know it's there. And you think...
Really?
No, that bird knows it's there. And so this is an example of one of the more sensitive ways to monitor ecosystems and get information. So the problem is that when farmers put out poison, they poison dead cattle so that scavengers like lions don't become a problem for them, I guess.
Yeah.
Other harmless scavengers like vultures will also get poisoned. And this problem is so widespread that captive breeding seems like the only practical solution. However, it's really hard to incubate vulture eggs. And it's really hard to find out exactly what's going on in the nest. So this 3D printer, or this 3D printing, has been used to create an electronic egg with sensors inside it that a vulture will incubate as if it was a normal egg without even realising, I guess, that it's an intruder.
Is it the size of a brick and the bird doesn't even know it's there?
No, it's the same. It's the shape of a normal vulture egg. It's shaped the same weight distribution, so as it rolls around, it's got the same texture as an egg. So, but inside, instead of a baby vulture, it's got sensors. So it can sense the humidity, the temperature, how much turning that happens, everything that's going on in the vulture's nest.
That's really cool.
It's really cool.
And so what's the end goal with this? So you get all this information, you get the temperature, humidity and all that sort of stuff. What's the then plan? Is it to keep them in captive breeding habitats or something,
I guess if
and
you can
control everything? Or
maintain... Well, I guess it's so that you can get a captive breeding program going. I mean, I think a lot of birds don't... Or a lot of animals, I should say, don't behave the same way in captivity, and often it's really hard to breed in captivity. So the more you know about what should be happening, the better. And the good thing about 3D printing is that it actually will make this technology a bit more accessible around the world.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, you can get 3D printers for under $1,000 now. And I think they said that they'll sell you the sensors for this for about $200. So you can print however many eggs you need.
Yeah, and presumably also you can design the egg that you need. So you're probably not interested in vultures. We might be interested in, emus or whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think this is really cool.
It's all about big data and data mining. The more information you have, the better you can run your conservation program. Very cool. Now, sticking with birds, let's talk about the skua, a clever Antarctic seabird that can recognise individual humans. And the story of how we know that is really cool, I think, Penny.
It is pretty cool. This has been some research done by Korea in Antarctica on King George Island. And these animals did not evolve around humans, and humans haven't been there for long. There certainly hasn't been, a mass human presence on the island. And I really like this research design, really. So the idea is that these skuas can actually recognise individual humans, and they think that it's done visually rather than by scent because it's so windy there. And what they did is they got some people to become nest intruders, and other people identically dressed would be neutral visitors. And so, like many birds, skuas don't appreciate anyone poking around their nest, and they will attack intruders. So the researchers check in the nest, visiting and becoming an intruder, so that the bird starts to attack them. And then a neutral visitor comes. But all of the nesting pairs that they studied really directed their attacks at the known intruder. So even though
the neutral was someone who had never been to that nest before.
Never been to that nest before,
Gotcha.
But dressed the same as the usual intruder.
Yeah.
And the birds could tell which one was the intruder and which one was neutral. So there was something about the individual human that they were recognising. And they're not involved with humans, so it's not a trait that you'd think is just built in.
Yeah.
They weren't just looking at clothes, so it might have been gait or something, which suggests that these birds are pretty smart.
Yeah. I think it's easy for us to sort of jump to the conclusion, they're recognising the faces, because that's how we sort of think that we recognise people. But I think it's probably much more likely to be the size, stature and bulk of someone and how they walk and their, all those sort of periphery unique identifiers, maybe.
Well, yeah, as a short-sighted person, I often recognise people in the distance by how they walk rather than, what they look like.
As someone who's terrible at remembering faces, I do the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, no, it's very cool. Now, we talked last week about the troubled Japanese space telescope Hitomi, which lost contact about a month after its February launch. The latest update, according to the Japan Today newspaper, is pretty bleak. You might remember we talked about a few fragments that were being tracked by Earth that were described as being non-essential. It's now looking like at least 10 pieces or even possibly a complete breakup of the craft. The Vice President of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, JAXA, Saku Tsuneta, said on Friday, "We haven't given up hope for recovery, but we may have to think about the worst-case scenario. I think it's looking very much like it's been lost. It'll probably become space junk and eventually, in a few years, burn up in our atmosphere." It's really sad news because since 2000, I think, Japan has tried twice to put a space-based X-ray telescope up. The first time it crashed during launch. The second one suffered from a leaky helium tank. So everyone's hopes were on this third try to get it up there, and looks like it's possibly exploded. There are probably 3 leading explanations so far. Of course, it's really hard to diagnose something like this when you can't even communicate with the craft to get a recording of what's been happening, sort of thing. Probably the most likely explanations are that it was an explosion, either of the helium cryogen that keeps all the instruments at the right temperature, or the nitrogen that it uses for maneuverability and moving around. Or the least likely possibility is that it was an impact with another object. But
like my space junk or something like that.
Yeah. But I gather it's mostly going to be an onboard explosion is the most likely candidate, which is a bit of a shame. But space is risky business and it's not easy to do these things right. But I think that's our show. And as always, we'll have all the links to everything we talked about today at scienceontop.com/221. And there you can find our social media links, ways to get in touch and leave some feedback. You can also email us, feedback@scienceontop.com. We really appreciate all the feedback we get and the reviews that people leave us on iTunes. And as always, thank you, Penny and Shane. This episode was edited with buffoonish glee by Marcos Benamou. And thank you everyone for listening. We'll be back again next week, putting science on top of the agenda. Join us then.
I was going to ask you to explain quantum computing, but when do you expect Canada's ISIL mission to begin again? And are we not doing anything in the interim while we prepare?
Okay. Very simply, normal computers work by... No, don't interrupt me. When you walk out of here, you will know more. Well, no, some of you will know far less about quantum computing, but most of you, normal computers work either there's power going through a wire or not. It's 1 or a 0. They're binary systems. What quantum states allow for is much more complex information to be encoded into a single bit. Regular computer bit is either a 1 or a 0, on or off. A quantum state can be much more complex than that because, as we know, things can be both particle and wave at the same times, and the uncertainty around quantum states allows us to encode more information into a much smaller computer. So that's what's exciting about quantum computing, and that's what we're doing. Don't get me going on this, or we'll be here all day, trust me.